everyone, and welcome to another episode of FPC Fantasy Live. Here for week 15, Sunday morning. I know week 15's already started. We've already had 4 games this week, but still a lot of contests today that will impact fantasy football in significant ways. These are, in fact, for most leagues, and there may be some that start next week, but for the most part, this is the beginning of the fantasy football playoffs. So every start sit decision, every injury could have massive impacts on the whole of the season. So I'm going to best here today. As always, I am Kyle Senner, your host of FPC Fantasy Live. And like every Sunday morning, I'll be here to talk about some start sit decisions. I'll also go into the active and active report once that's fully released around 12 noon. So yeah, we've already got hints now a certain player, about half hour or so, a little less than that. We'll take a look at the full active and active report and find out who's in, who's out, and then how to get those fantasy lineups set. So, and of course, this isn't all just about me. If anyone has any questions, feel free to head over to the uh, Full Press Coverage YouTube page. We're also on Facebook and Twitch. You can leave your comments there. You can also tag me on Twitter at Senra Says, and I will get back to you. I know someone already tagged me this morning with a couple questions, or well, a question, the few players to decide between. So I talk about that. It does raise the point of, of something I got wrong last week for anyone who was watching. But speaking of last week, this will be my last episode of the season. I'm traveling for the holidays after this, so I won't be available for FPC Fantasy Live. But this will be kind of a last hurrah at this, folks. Again, fantasy football playoffs. I know for myself, I made about, I think I calculated it was 59% of my leagues I made the playoffs. I didn't get a single first round bye, so everything's coming down to this week. I'm hoping to have I don't want every single one of those leagues to go through. I mean, some of those leagues the playoffs started earlier, so two of them in particular started like week 12, so I've already been eliminated from those. But yeah, so I've got 11 leagues, I guess, still on the line, and I'm hoping I'd like all 11 to get through next week. I don't think that's going to happen. Um, to see how most of them, some of them, at least one team get through, please. So we'll find out all about that. Like I mentioned, feel free to share any of your questions. I know one of the things that I'm going to share that I do every week is a start sit spreadsheet that I make for myself, all of my decisions. And I decided to do this week. Every single team that league had a playoff team, or every single league I was in the playoffs. I wanted to kind of decide. I wanted to force myself to make a decision. I wanted to go through and examine. Okay, like I'm just gonna autopilot start. Let me really dive in and dig into each of these teams and find where the decision might be in terms of what I can reasonably expect. Some must-start players that are going to have bad weeks, but because we have such, you know, we hold them in such high regard, or they're drafted early, or we understand that the ceiling they have, we never really want to bench him. Um, okay, so yeah, I think just looking through, see if anyone's tagged me yet in questions, and yeah, feel free to share your questions here in the chat. Yeah, what I'm going to do is share this start spreadsheet, so hopefully can get something from it, not just to see what decisions I'm making, but also why I'm making these decisions. So let me share that right now. Like football players, got to stay hydrated to perform. All right, so this is what I set up every week. Start sit spreadsheet, bunch of different decisions, different leagues, different players. So first off, I wanted to show the things I put in the spreadsheet. So 4 things that have to do directly with player production in terms of fantasy points. What's the average amount they've scored this year? And what's the range of outcomes? What's the fewest they've scored and the highest they've scored? In certain situations, I might manipulate that, like to only count a certain range of games if something applies. Say a running back became a lead back, and then I'll just count those weeks where he got the majority of the work. Quarterback change for a pass catcher. I'll just go with where the new quarterback is. So some things like that. Then the projection that each of these players have on site. Targets per game, which sometimes I look at, other times I won't necessarily. especially a cross position. I find that, especially when comparing running backs to either wide receivers or tight ends, their targets per game are going to be a little misleading. Usually the running backs will be a lot lower. That doesn't mean it's a negative because their opportunity in terms of total touches will usually be greater. Then we've got sort of the team, like more to do with the team itself, which is kind of the back half here of the spreadsheet. So the defensive ranking, the points, the fantasy points allowed by the defense that the player is facing to that specific position. So, like the very first example here is Jared Goff. That would mean at 17, that means the Broncos give up the 17th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks, so the 16th most, for instance. So higher numbers is better. You want the team that's allowing the 30 because it's defensive ranked by fewest. So you want the defense that's allowing the 31st fewest points, which would be the most fantasy points. Avoid the team allowing the fewest points. Yeah, what I'll do is I'll put everything green in the positive. Green means go, and then orange in terms of the lower of each category. Then we got the odds makers line. The implied total and the over under. What were the and I usually get the lines set Monday morning. What did the odds makers project for this specific game in terms of the total points scored, but also the individual team total that's scored? That's a quick calculation you can make. You take the over under, you divide it in half, then you take the spread, you take half of that, add it to the number you got where the middle, the half of the over under. Yeah. So again, divide the over under in half, divide the spread in half, add those two together. That'll give you the favored team's implied total minus that number by the spread. That gives you the underdogs total. So implied total. Some sites will share it with you, but it is something easy to calculate as long as you're giving the spread and the over. And then finally, I'll plug one last time this year my goal line guide article, which we found at fullpresscoverage.com. And even after this, these streams are done, I'm going to continue to put out my weekly fantasy football rankings and my goal line guide article all the way through the end of the regular season. I'll even do week 18 in case people, because I know there are rare exceptions, and I would hope most people avoid these because it can be quite a hassle. But there are still some leagues that will play week 18, so I'll be sure to put my rankings and goal line guide article out for that. But how I calculate each team's goal line grade is simply looking at data that I collect through the year, information about teams inside five, both offensively and defensively. And all this I split to rush attempts and pass attempts. I want to know their efficiency. How often are they scoring touchdowns on these specific events inside the opponent's 5 yard line? I'm also looking defensively into the team's own 5 yard line. How often are they allowing touchdowns in those situations, running and passing? And I want the total touchdown scored to kind of some teams might have a high percentage because they run so few attempts. I don't want to necessarily reward them, punish the teams that by sheer number of volume are getting so many touchdowns. The percentage may not be great, the total number can still impact. That's something I've done differently this year. I feel like it's done better with the goal line guide as a result of that. And then I'll usually honestly throw the implied totals in as well. My thinking is the teams who are projected to score the more points are likely to score more touchdowns. And as I mentioned, everything is divided rushing passing. So what I do is the goal line guide differential is for each team's difference between their rush score and their pass score. And it'll be positive or negative depending on who the player is. For running backs, I'll use the rushing score. So meaning it'll if it's negative, like for instance, Clyde Edwards-Helaire here. A negative 11 means the Chiefs have a higher passing score than rushing score. But for Cavante Turpin, -3, because he's a receiver, then we're on the perspective of the passing score. So in this case, the Cowboys have a higher rushing score than passing score. So it'll all depend on the player specific. Again, I'll use the rushing score for the running backs, and then I'll use the passing score for every other player. There may be some quarterbacks who get more ceiling through rushing that I'll actually use the rushing score for. But that'll it's all really context dependent on this. But as you can see, quite a lot of decisions I have this week. And again, I made sure like every league I was in the playoffs, I at least wanted to decide something for them. Um, some of these decisions have already been made. Like for instance, Jared Goff, Jake Browning, I decided yesterday. I'm pretty sure Jared Goff outscored Jake Brown. I'll have to check. For sure. I think he ended up with 4 touchdowns. So I think that ended up being the right decision. But some of these decisions, like in this still particular league, that was one of the quarterback positions. Um, Yeah, I messed this up. This should be here, and this should say start to don't always do this correctly. Actually, I noticed some mistakes earlier that I don't think I fixed. This is that. Yeah, this one I messed up. So a couple of these I've actually messed up, I realized. I didn't fix them until just now. That might change things a little bit, but I guess that one is already too late to lock in. So I guess common themes that I'm choosing between. I'll talk about this decision here. So this DTHQ, even the names I'm getting wrong sometimes, slash DC. So the Dynasty Trades in Q, Dynasty Trades HQ slash Dynasty and Chill League. It was based on two patron groups put together. It's a 2014 league, two copies. It was an auction startup, super fun. I guess my biggest buy and also biggest payday. Happy to make the playoffs. It's actually a playoff started week 14, so I actually made it through the first round. So going into round two, I believe I'm playing the number one seed overall, so the number one seed in my division. I believe they're the best record, highest scoring team. So I've got a tough challenge this week. Noah Brown, and that's something that we'll find out if he's active or not. Obviously, if he's inactive, some of these decisions will become moot points, and I won't be playing. But if comparing to Cavante Turpin, yeah, I'll play Noah Brown in that instance. But if I've got other options, like in this league where we do have points per carry in this league, I think it's point 0.25 or no, I think it's 1.15 points per carry, and then it's tiered PPR, so the receivers do get more per reception than running backs. It's 1.25 as opposed to just one. But all to say, PPC, the points per carry, really made it so that Noah Brown doesn't look as good. And Singletary, I'm worried about the split with Pierce. Then it really does come down to starting two between James Conner, Jerome Ford, and Gus Edwards. Jerome Ford does look to be the best. One of the things that I look at, especially when I have multiple selections to make, like in this case, I have to select two. I want to look how often each of these players were in the top two of every category. And Gus Edwards Jerome Ford ended up being the best in that. If I compare just how often they were the highest to the lowest, Gus Edwards looks better. But still, I have Jerome Ford ranked higher, so he was kind of the automatic must start for me, especially against Chicago. This could warrant a lot of points. So that leaves my last decision to be between James Conner and Gus Edwards. My rankings have Connor higher than Edwards, but I'm suddenly leaning Edwards because of what the spreadsheet's saying. The goal line guide, especially, there's some touchdown upside with Edwards. His floor is not great though, but his ceiling is arguably the highest. And that's one thing. Connor has arguably the lowest ceiling of everyone here, especially against the Niners. So part of my thinking is again in the playoffs. I've made this philosophy known before, but I'll repeat it again. Anyone who wants to listen to the full press for Fantasy Pod, we do weekly shows. Myself, my co-host Brett Harvin, and I've definitely talked about this on air before. But when it comes to like, do I want a floor or a ceiling? I think that's a legit debate to have in the regular season, where you want as many wins as possible over an entire season, and you're playing the entire league essentially, which includes the good teams and the bad teams. So a safe floor can at least give you like the average to be able to aim close to the middle or be above average, right? Because we want to be just above the middle to be able to make the playoffs. The floor can do that. However, when it comes to the playoffs, I usually default to ceiling. My thinking is in the playoffs, you are just playing against the best teams. A safe floor might not really help you in the playoffs. You're trying to win one week. You're not trying to find an average over the course of 14 weeks. So that's where in the playoffs, I tend to just usually default to ceiling. So I almost don't want to track what the floor is, but I think it's still important to know. But yeah, I think just knowing that philosophy of ceiling versus floor really makes me want to go Gus Edwards over James Conner. I think he's got it's all based on touchdowns with Edwards. If he can score two touchdowns, yeah, that he's hitting that ceiling. He's hitting that ceiling like he's done before this year. If he doesn't, though, he's he's not getting enough. He's getting less than a target per game. Although he does have a career high in receptions already this year, and I think he said it like several weeks ago. So you can tell they're passing slightly more to him, but they've never passed him before. So anything was good slightly. But yeah, Gus Edwards, I there's a risk with the floor, but I also think I'm worried about James Conner's ceiling. So that's why I'm leaning towards Gus Edwards. I haven't really fully that's like the last decision I really haven't made yet. A couple other leagues, like I'm gonna plug in Gus Edwards when it comes to playing over Damian Pierce and Roschon Johnson. I already played Bailey Zappi, or sorry, Tyler Gordon in the league. Yes, that's an interesting discussion. There's a few quarterback decisions I've had to make. Some of them have already been done because they played yesterday. I mentioned choosing Jared Goff over Jake Browning, playing Tommy DeVito over Bailey Zappi. When I first did my rankings, DeVito was actually the lowest, and part of that was this 47.5 goal line guy. When I only am deciding between 2 players, I'm not gonna indicate the highest and lowest because it'll every everything will be colored. So I usually just show the highest. Excuse me. But one of the reasons I had Tommy DeVito so low earlier in the week, like I think outside the top 25 quarterbacks, was the goal line guide. 47.5 is the lowest overall goal line guide of the week. That is for the Giants passing game. So seeing there's not a whole lot of touchdown upside for the Giants, specifically with Tommy DeVito playing the Saints. Where the touchdown upside lies is probably with Saquon. That being said, there's almost every other category. The way he's been producing this year looks better than Zappy. See all these green, right? Better average, better floor, better ceiling, better projection. And with quarterbacks, I'm very careful to just take the games they started, completed, that comparison done. Both games have the same over under 37, so neither game is expected to have a ton of scoring. The Giants are projected to score more though than the Patriots. So all that together, one of the things that I do is once I go through this spreadsheet, usually I'll set it up Friday, and especially this week was Friday because the game's on Saturday. I might leave it to Saturday during normal weeks, but what I'll do is I will go change my rankings based on what I'm doing in these start sit spreadsheets. If I'm really playing this, like in this case, Tommy DeVito over Bailey Zappi, I gotta change my rankings to reflect that because I am in fact putting Tommy DeVito above Bailey Zappi. So I usually publish my rankings Tuesday, but I will update them all the way through Saturday. I don't usually update them Sunday morning. There's too much to do. In terms of I will update the rankings on the Fantasy Pros accuracy ranking before Sunday morning, but to re-update the article on full press coverage, that's a little much, I find, but I will usually re-update that article every usually Saturday as a final once I've really gone through the rankings and decided. Is there anything else of note? There's a few leagues with Ken Walker, and I've already had to make those decisions, deciding between Ken Walker, Zach Moss, and David Montgomery. I probably made the wrong decision there, should have played Ken Walker there. In this other league where I decided between Ken Walker and T. Higgins, like I also made the wrong decision there because I probably should have played T. Higgins with 2 touchdowns. I think he had 0 catches at halftime, so at first it looked like it might be the right decision, and then suddenly 2 touchdowns in the after halftime, and it's, I mean, one was in overtime. Or no, maybe it's 1 touchdown. Yeah, 2 touchdowns in the second half. It really, made me seem like, yeah, I probably should have played T. Higgins there, so I kinda messed up there. Um This was an interesting one. Patrick Mahomes versus Kyler Murray versus Russell Wilson. And I actually had Murray ranked ahead of Wilson. I had Mahomes ranked the highest. What a world we've come to where I'm actually having to plug Patrick Mahomes into the starts to the spreadsheet. He's been like you just start him. You don't worry about Patrick Mahomes. You just play him every week. But his production's to the point where actually it's close enough. Like you look at the average he scored, 19.83, less than a full point ahead of Murray, and basically about a point and a half ahead of Russell Wilson. His floor is also the lowest. He's had games this year under double-digit fantasy points. Now his ceiling's the best, and ultimately, once I went through the spreadsheet, Mahomes looked the best. So I have him ranked, I think, at like QB5, I think, this week. I think it's QB5, and then Justin Fields QB6. Those two, I think, both have pretty high upside. And then it was deciding between Kyler Murray and Russell Wilson. Ultimately, I went with Russell Wilson, and so I think one of the things I had to change in my rankings was initially I think I had Wilson 13, 14. I moved him into leave QB 10. I think I've got Murray at 11. So I want to make sure I moved him ahead of Kyler Murray. But yeah, those are some of the bigger main decisions I've had to make. Mahomes over Kyler Murray. This was and then same league, Amari Cooper versus Brandon Cooks versus Jaden Reed. And one of the things that kind of looking at the spreadsheet, Cooks graded out the worst, and so uh, that was already kind of okay. The inclination there to bench him, and then it's also new like that he was questionable. So we really still don't even know if he's actually going to play today. So I've kind of chose to play it safe anyway and bench him, but it turns out like spreadsheet wise, it looks like the right decision. Got the lowest average. Yes, he has the highest ceiling, but his floor isn't great. None of these floors are great. The receivers and fewest targets per game. The defensive ranking looks like it's the toughest matchup of the 3. The goal line guide is the lowest. The goal line grade for the passing offense. So, all to say, Amari Cooper did end up looking the best. That's still a pretty difficult decision for me. Amari Cooper versus Jaden Reed, And I believe I have Devon Achane in that league too, so if Achane's out, then I suddenly have to play these guys. And, oh, you just put in Jaden. Yeah, that's kind of my process. In about 10 minutes, we'll get to the active and inactive report, but I guess I'll check to see if there's any comments, questions, anything they'd like, to share with me. I'll check, Twitter as well in case anyone has tagged me. Uh, yeah, nothing yet so far. So, yeah, I guess what I'll do is I will, um I don't know what I'll do yet. I guess you know what? Maybe I will check the active and active report just to see if it's available so we can get to that, see who's in, and that might also help with certain decisions, I would say. Week 15. Usually go to RotoWire, just like the way it's set up, and they're usually pretty quick and up to date. All right, um, so looking at the week 15 inactives, I guess they've got a few out. We can start with Falcons, I suppose. Actually, I don't know if everything's out yet. Let me check something. Let me see. Because usually, if I'll go right to the bottom. Washington is playing at 4, and they didn't have Washington listed. So I think everything's out. Yeah, it looks like everything. Okay. So, yeah, let me read through this again. Stay hydrated. The Atlanta Falcons. So, in terms of fantasy relevant players, the only player inactive for the Falcons is Mac Hollins. Uh, Kinda did seem like at one point in the season he might be the wide receiver too, but he's dealt with an injury and has missed quite a few weeks, so really just does come down to the main 3 of Drake London at wide receiver, Kyle Pitts at tight end, and of course, Bijan Robinson at running back. I've got him ranked super high this week. They're playing the Panthers, one of the best matches you can imagine. So, really those 3 are the main guys. I don't love Desmond Ridder this week. I do like London and Pitts to a certain extent, but I'd probably try to avoid Desmond Ridder just because I think he'll have so much success running. That can come from Desmond Ridder himself too, though, so I do understand it. Actually have Ritter ranked below Bryce Young. On the Panthers side, they're you know, 3 fantasy relevant inactives, 2 at wide receiver, Terrace Marshall and Mike Strachan. Marshall has been kind of a healthy scratch most of the year, and even when he's played, he's gotten games where he gets 0 targets, so not super useful. The rookie, Jonathan Mingo, is clearly ahead of him, very much so. Ian Thomas at tight end is inactive, and Hayden Hurst isn't listed, but I also think Hayden Hurst was put on injured reserve. Let me just verify that, because I think okay, yeah, Hayden Hurst was put on injured reserve, so he won't appear on the active inactive list. But that means that Tommy Tremble is active and is the main Panthers tight end. I don't love to play him. Be I'd be really desperate at tight end. I think there's gonna be enough other players available who'll want to not play, Tommy Tremble. Looking at the Chicago Bears, Equanimeous St. Brown is inactive, and that's the big news there really is that DJ Moore is active. He was questionable, but he will play. DJ Moore is in. Feeling like Fields is a top 6 option as a result of that, even in a tough matchup against the Browns. He can use his legs enough. I think that's where you beat the Browns is on the ground. I think Fields himself can do that. I still like DJ Moore this week. Maybe, not the huge ceiling week for him, but I still think he should do pretty well. I believe I've got him just outside the top 12. I can double check my rankings real quick, but I believe it was around I think I've got more in the top 50. So, um, DJ Moore. Actually, I've got him at, wide receiver 19. So, yeah, not inside the top 20. I initially started the week, I might have even had him in the top 12, and then, now there's a few players out, so it'll actually raise DJ Moore to, like, a 17. Yeah, a couple players out, uh, I guess 16. So, yeah, so there's that. For the Cincinnati Bengals, Chris Evans is inactive. So, he's He's been passed by the rookie Chase Brown almost from the get-go. Travion Williams is ahead of him. He's really like the 4th running back, and even then, I'm pretty sure Chris Evans has more receiving yards in his career than rushing. So, he really is truly just a pass catching back, satellite back type thing, special teams player when he is active. He's been inactive the last couple weeks since Chase Brown has come off IR. Go Canadian Chase Brown. He looks to be. Oh wait, the Bengals played yesterday. This doesn't even. Sorry. Still, Motor will put every game 3-1. Nothing really of fantasy relevance for the Browns. It looks like they'll have their full complement of weapons that's at least available at this point. Green Bay Packers. So here we have a few inactives. So a couple of key defensive players, Darnell Savage, Jair Alexander. It could mean that it's easier for the Buccaneers to pass the ball, so you're maybe stealing games for like Mike Evans, Baker Mayfield, and such. Fantasy positions themselves wise, though, running back AJ Dillon's out, but Aaron Jones returns to action. So Jones kind of gets the backfield to himself. Wide receiver Christian Watson will be out again. I expect he'll miss next week too. I'll be honest. For anyone who listened to the Full Press Packers pod, which is also a podcast I do, when Christian Watson first got hurt, I said there's a chance. There's a chance he's done for the season. With the hamstring injuries, they can be really tricky. I said the earliest I saw him coming back was the Vikings game, week 17. So I don't think he's obviously out this week. I don't think he's going to play next week against the Panthers. Don't expect to have Christian Watson, except maybe during the fantasy championship. But even then, that we'll see because it'll be not 100% enough. And then Samari Toure is also inactive. Dontavian Wicks was questionable. So the Packers' main 4 wide receivers are going to, they're all young, but it's going to be Jaden Reed, Romeo Doubs, Dontavian Wicks, and Lee Keith. Also have rookie tight end Tucker Kraft, with at least the veteran Jones returning, but everyone else on a rookie contract. Houston Texans now. So big news. Both their first round picks this year are out. Will Anderson's inactive. CJ Stroud out with a concussion. Will Anderson's obviously a defensive player. We have quarterback CJ Stroud out, which means Davis Mills, I believe, will be getting the start this week. And Nico Collins is out. But Noah Brown, who was questionable, will be active. So Brown's in. I'm not so excited to play him, knowing that it's Davis Mills. I don't think he's an awful quarterback. Really not as good as CJ Stroud. Yeah, so no Stroud, no Collins this week. Kansas City Chiefs, Isaiah Pacheco is going to miss a second straight game, so Jerick McKinnon, Clyde Edwards-Helaire will split the work. McKinnon seems like the better option of the 2, to be honest. Miami Dolphins next. I guess this is probably the biggest news of the day. Tyreek Hill is out. So Tyreek Hill will not play. Jalen Waddle's in. I don't even know who will really be the other starting receiver. It might be Cedric Wilson. Yeah, I don't know what to say. I don't know how to help. Maybe Chosen Anderson. I don't even know if he's on. In terms of Dolphins receivers, Braxton Berrios there. I think Cedric Wilson would profile as the guy that would go into the lineup. I had Tua at QB12. I don't know that I love that. I might even consider lowering him as a result of that. Yeah, that's tough to have a huge upside with Tua if Tyreek's not in the game. So I know I'll be relying on him in a playoff game, unfortunately. Other options are Anthony Richardson and Geno Smith, and with Smith questionable on the Monday night, I really don't want to risk that. So, yeah, looking like Tua gonna have to roll with. Not great. And then New England Patriots, Ramondre's out again, so Ezekiel Elliott will get the lead running back role. He should get the majority of the touches. And then Juju Smith-Schuster is also inactive. He's questionable going into the week. Uh, Mario Davis. No, Mario Douglas? Oh, man. There's a DD Davis and a DD Douglas for both rookies, one for the Pats, one's for the Chargers. I think it's Demario Douglas. Clearly, I don't roster him. I know this if I did. He's the Pats' number 1 receiver. I don't really wanna play him. I think actually the one Pats player I would consider starting is the tight end, Hunter Henry, especially in tight end premium leagues or start 2 tight end leagues. I think he might almost be a must start at that point. That's the guy I wanna go. I mean, Zeke's good. After that, I don't love even Zeke's not in a sense, the Chiefs' run defense is better than the pass defense. Unfortunately, Zeke is playing against the tougher side of the Chiefs' defense. So, still don't love it, but I think he's viable. He'll get enough carries. He'll get a safe floor. I said safe floor for Ty Chandler yesterday, and he goes and scores a touchdown right away and actually shows his ceiling. So, probably the second biggest piece of news, though, other than Tyreek Hill being out is Chris Olave is inactive. So Chris Olave, he will, yeah, Chris Olave not in. Kendra Miller's also out, which has been the case for a lot of the season. Ryan Ramczyk, is their left tackle? Is he their left tackle or their right tackle? I can't remember. One of their starting tackles, Ramczyk, he's out as well. So, um, yeah, that's going to be huge. For this offense. I don't love it. I already had Derek Carr super low in the rankings. This perpetuates that even further. Yeah, I've got him at QB 29 in the rankings. The only guys lower are Mitch Trubisky, Davis Mills, and Stick, and 2 of them played to where they're locked in. So I think Derek Carr, QB 29 seems to fit pretty well for most of the season and just continue. Yeah, no Chris Olave, that really hurts. No Michael Thomas either still. Think Shaheed will be back, uh, but still, if that's your number 1 receiver, I don't love that. I mean, Kamara should probably get volume, so Kamara is a great start, I think. Uh, their opponent is the New York Giants, and, their tackle's out too, Evan Neal. Also, Paris Campbell at wide receivers out and running back Jashaun Corbin. It seems like with Corbin, he's been active the last a few weeks ago, he was active for a few of those weeks, and then Eric Gray, the rookie, came off injured reserve. He's gone back to being the 3rd guy behind Matt Breida, but of course, Saquon Barkley, the only Giants player you probably wanna start. There's news Darren Waller is practicing. Um, actually, is he gonna be active today? No. I he was 'cause here's the it's tricky because he was designated to return from injured reserve, but he, um, but he I don't know if he's off the injured reserve yet. Oh, never mind. Darren Waller is active. So yeah, he has been fully activated off the injured reserve. So Darren Waller will get the start today. So Daniel Bellinger not starting. Waller might be the only other guy. And you haven't seen him with Tommy DeVito yet. So maybe he unlocks some type of ceiling with Waller there. There's a league or two I might actually have to go plug Waller in. Yeah. Who wants to play Clyde Edwards-Helaire when you can play Darren Waller? Or even Noah Brown. Ooh, that's a tricky one. That is tricky. Not playing commodity turf. Yeah, that's I guess oh, that's the only spot I have Waller, which I'm still alive. I have him in Scott Fishbowl playoffs, but I'm out of that. So yeah, so Darren Waller's active. So yeah, Barkley and Waller, probably the 2 players you wanna play. If it's super flex league, I get having to play Tommy DeVito as New York Jets, Jason Brown is the only wide receiver inactive, so you should have Zach Wilson with his full complement of weapons, which is mostly just Garrett Wilson and Ty Conklin in terms of what we wanna start in fantasy. Tampa Bay Buccaneers, looks like they have their whole offense available. Now there's a few defensive players that'll be out. A couple of their starters: William Golston, Devin White, Ryan Neal. That's one at every level. Actually, 2 in the defensive secondary. So Carlton Davis and Ryan Neal out. Starting corner and safety. It actually mirrors the Packers with Alexander and Savage out. So I guess it's even footing. Go Pack, go! But yeah, I'm not loving that. Really a high scoring game there potentially. Tennessee Titans, Kyle Phillips is inactive, and that's about it. So it looks like Treylon Burks is back. I don't know if he's back to actually producing, doesn't look like it. Titans wise, you probably want to play Henry, DeAndre Hopkins, if it's a super flex, Will Levis, single QB. I've got Will Levis. Decided between him and Zach Wilson. Actually, it's a tricky decision because I've got Will Levis at 20, Zach Wilson 21, Tommy DeVito 22, Young 23, Zach 24. Having to decide between those guys, I think I like Will Levis, but between Will Levis and say like a Baker Mayfield or even a Joe Flacco, that's when I would prefer to go with those guys as opposed to the young. Yeah, so that's the active and inactive report. I don't see any other questions or comments. I'll go check Twitter again just in case someone has tagged me. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I guess that's it. Nothing to do, and yeah, I guess there's no comments here. But thank you everyone who's watched and listened throughout the year. I guess with nothing else to do, I'll leave a little early. give people a chance to go, get their lineup set, and, uh, yeah, we'll see it from there. Um, yeah. So anyway, thank you very much, everyone. Once again, my name is Kyle Senra. I co-host the Full Press Fantasy Pod and the Full Press Packers Pod. Follow me on Twitter at Senra Says. Follow those accounts at FPC_Packers at FPC_Fantasy Pod. So while this end, Fantasy Live is ending for the year after this episode here. The Fantasy Pod will continue every week through I'll say through the NFL playoffs, and then by the time the NFL playoffs are done, we're probably getting back to like coaching changes and preparing talking free agency shortly after that. So not too much of an absence, maybe a 1 week absence in February, but for the most part, Fantasy Pod will kind of go through. Currently, the Packers Pod. This will probably be the last week with 2 episodes. I plan to record a reaction pod later today, talking about the Packers Buccaneers game, and then we'll do I believe Thursday night we'll record our preview for the Panthers game, and then after that, the next couple weeks we'll just do a 1 episode a week that recaps the previous game, previews the next game, and then if the Packers are in the playoffs, we'll keep going weekly there. Might still do some playoff episodes for the Full Press Packers pod. Regardless, we'll decide. We'll see what Jesse and I are feeling like. Jesse Paul, my co-host. But certainly the Full Press Fantasy Pod will continue through the fantasy playoffs and the NFL playoffs. So look for that every week, specifically the next 2 or 3 weeks, where we'll just really be talking strictly prepping for the week every week, which is what we do. Every episode of the Fantasy Pod will usually we'll update the Dynasty League, the FPC list for the Dynasty League, but then also talk about the odds makers lines, the over-unders, what are the highest over-unders, what are the lowest ones, how about the implied totals, which teams are expected to score the most, score the least. I'll go through some of the big observations from my goal line guide article. Then usually Brad Harvin and I end our episodes with rankings debates. Some of the biggest differences he and I have in our rankings and why we have players ranked that way, and usually polls on Twitter as well, which there's still a few polls available for this week, especially for this Sunday night Jags Ravens game. So again, check out the pinned tweet, FPC Fantasy Pod. Yeah, I'd like to thank everyone who's watched all through the season. There's been a lot of great questions asked. Makes my brain think. I do like that. I do love fantasy. I don't always get them right though, and I noticed last week that I got 2 questions asked, and I bombed both of them. Someone asked about Goddard versus Njoku. I said to go with Goddard, and Njoku smashed. Goddard really didn't do much, so kind of sorry to that person. Someone asked me this morning, basically almost the same question. There are 2 tight ends between who was it? Goddard, Njoku, and then Isaiah Likely. And actually, one of our polls that Brad and I are running this week is Isaiah Likely. The consensus rank on him in terms of tight end is inside the top 10. I've got Likely actually at tight end 15 this week. So I my answer was to bench Likely and play the other 2, play Njoku and Goddard. I definitely think Njoku is the strongest start, though. He's the guy I have ranked highest in my rankings this week. Last week, made a mistake, obviously. And also the time aspect of it. You play Njoku now, and you can wait to Sunday night and then decide, okay, do I want to play Likely tonight or wait tomorrow night for Goddard? You can kind of reevaluate what the teams are. Again, the whole floor ceiling thing comes kind of that's where it can really enter into it in terms of specifically how many points you need left for the win when there's so few players left. So yeah, hopefully that helps out everyone. Santiago Izilius says, "No, yeah, I know, unfortunately, it's the final week, Santiago, but, if you do have a question to get in, I'll give you a couple minutes, and then, we can answer one final question if you need, but yes, yeah, FPC Fantasy Live here every week on well, no, not any week anymore, every week up to this point, and yes, this will be the last week here for 2022. Again, I'm traveling a lot during the holidays, just not available on Sunday mornings. Um, I know that I believe Ian and Braden will continue, however, with their show, the Full Press Radio Live in the mornings. Before this, I think they usually go. They start at 10:30. Um, I know Ian would usually like to do things during the playoffs too, and with multiple days, that might be streams on Saturdays as well. So we'll see through the year, through the early in the new year, with the NFL playoffs, live stream schedule ends up looking like. Yeah, I'm just again going through Twitter, making sure no one's tagging me for any questions because I'll gladly answer anything there as well. Um, but yeah, I guess yeah. If you get check the pin tweet at FPC Fantasy Pod, you'll see a few polls there. One's about Tua Tagovailoa, QB7 and QB12. QB12 is my ranking. It might even be a little high now. Weeks out. Gus Edwards, RB20, RB36. I think since then, like there's been a couple guys inactive. I think I've actually like it's 35 now. Calvin Ridley, wide receiver 19 versus wide receiver 27. And then, as mentioned, Isaiah Likely. Brad Harvin has him at tight end 7. I'm at tight end 15. So if you want to check the pin tweet on the Full Price Fantasy Pod account, there'll be the pin, the first, like there's a thread. The first tweet is the most recent episode, which you can check out if you'd like, and check that every week. And then after that, there's the 4 polls in that thread. If you want to vote on those as well, feel free. Fun. Yeah, so we'll give it another 60 seconds and then we'll head out. But yeah, the big news again, I guess I'll repeat the biggest news. Tyreek Hill and Chris Olave are inactive. So that's those are the earth-shattering revelations we've gotten this morning. A couple lineups I'm gonna have to go play with. I mean, we knew they were questionable, so that to have been prepared. I don't love my options. I'm having to go with like one. I think I'm gonna replace Chris Olave with like Nelson Aguilar, which doesn't feel great. Not gonna lie. So it's yeah, that's not ideal. So there'll be a few people probably in very similar situations though. So uh, yeah, I don't see any other questions on Twitter. No questions in the chat. So I guess this will be, folks, my final sign off here. So this is the final episode in 2023 of the Full Press Fantasy Live series. Next year if this continues. But for now, the things that will for sure continue to run are the 2 podcasts I co-host, the Full Press Fantasy Pod and the Full Press Packers Pod. There'll be a Full Press Packers Pod episode out later tonight, probably. I need to record a reaction episode after this Buccaneers Packers game, which is going to start in less than an hour. And then Full Press Fantasy Pod, I believe we're planning to record Tuesday night, and then probably another Packers Pod episode Thursday night. Get 3 podcasts this week. I reduced to 2 next week. Starting next week, we'll just go once a week for the Packers Pod until the end of the season, and then it'll be maybe every 2 weeks through the offseason. The Fantasy Pod, that again will continue weekly through the NFL playoffs, and then even then, maybe a 1 or 2 week absence before coming back in and just going basically weekly again to start the 2024 season. Usually, the first thing we do is talk coaching changes because the Super Bowl's done, but wait a week after the Super Bowl, there'll be usually all the coaching changes will have been done, so we can do a full episode talking about them specifically on offense. The head coaches who change, how that affects those offenses, the offensive coordinators. So that'll be all once the NFL playoffs are done. The Full Press Fantasy Pod basically will go nonstop all year. So fun to talk fantasy football. I love talking all this. I appreciate everyone who's joined all year here. FPC Fantasy Live. I'm Kyle Senra signing out.